Welcome to part 2 of 3 of our beginner VFX shot. This is going to be the blender section, and this is just a reminder of what the shot looks like. So let's get started. We're going to open up Blender and then go to File, Import FBX, and we have to go to the FBX that we just exported from DaVinci Resolve, and we want to bring that in. We need to set the scale from 1 to 0.1, which I don't know why my screen recorder didn't get, but that's what I was doing right there. And now we can see our scene. We have our camera tracked, our shadow catcher, our tree is our reference point, so that's why I brought in that image panel there. And then the background is basically the way that Blender shows the screen, which we don't need. So we're going to click on that and we're going to delete that because we don't need that big screen behind us to do what we're going to do. So you're going to come up here to the top right hand side where you have that and then hit delete on your keyboard. Now you're able to view through the camera by clicking on this little camera, and then this kind of shows our scene. So in our bin, our collections, top right, we want to check the camera 3D and then check this little green camera icon here. And then this is where the focal length is that we got from DaVinci Resolve. So that's why it's so important to write down that focal length that we got off of DaVinci Resolve from that camera 3D. And then we're going to paste that or type in that focal length here on Blender. So we have basically the same 3D camera that we had in DaVinci Resolve. So everything lines up perfectly. We have our scene laid out. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is import our images. So if we click on this background images and then open and then go to, I don't know why my screen recorder didn't capture it, but basically you would select your image sequence wherever you saved it on your desktop. And then once you hit open, add image, you're going to see essentially the scene on that background square. You're going to see the landscape that we have. So this is going to help us with our composite. So you'll click on add image and then go to open. Go to wherever you saved your image sequence on your desktop. You want to select that image sequence and then hit open, and then once you hit enter, it'll pop up on the actual background, so you'll be able to see the scene and help you composite. So we have the timeline at the bottom in Blender. It's actually showing frame 1 through 250 is the end. So one thing I didn't do here, but when you see end 250 bottom right, just change that to 288 and then I'll get the full 12 seconds in. So then next we want to go to the ground plane, click on this little red circle icon on the side of Blender, and then what we're going to do is just remove this material by checking on it and then hitting the minus button right here. So you'll see the little minus button, click on that, removes the material. We go to the image plane, click on material, hit the minus button there just to minus both of those. And the next thing I want to do is just kind of enlarge our shadow catcher. So how you're able to do that is just click on the actual shadow catcher itself, and then I believe you hold the hotkey S to scale, and then you can scale it in the X or Y or Z planes of rotation. So I'm just making it as big as possible so that way it'll get all the shadows from the 3D spaceship. So you want to make sure that it captures basically every single shadow throughout all of the frames. So click on that. I believe it's S to scale. You can see there, and then just kind of make it as big as possible. It's not an issue if it's too big. It's an issue if it's too small. So we just want to make that large as possible so that way it can actually capture all of our shadows and we're not missing any shadows in our scene here. So just click on it, hit S to scale, and then scale it up large. Larger is better than smaller. And then these are the hot buttons essentially for Blender if you don't know. S, and you can do the X for the X axis, Y for the Y, and then Z for the Z axis. G is also to move, so you hit G on your keyboard. Those are some keyboard hot tips that you want to know to operate in Blender, how you're able to move objects around in the 3D space by using those keyboard buttons there. So just kind of demonstrating how to do that here. And then you can see me just kind of messing around in 3D space to kind of show you the lay of the land of the scene. So we have our center point, we have our image plane, we have our camera, and it has the slow push in that we tracked, and we got that in from DaVinci Resolve into Blender in our scene. So now we're working in our 3D space, so that way we can set up our 3D spaceship and get this composition started. So next steps here is we have to import our spaceship into our scene here. So we have our camera tracked and our shadow catcher. This is what I was stating earlier right here where it says end. You want to switch that from 250 to 288. Our start is frame 1, our end is frame 288 to get our full 12 seconds, because on the previous one it shows 250 is where Blender had it cut off, but you can just click on it right here and move that to 288 so you can get the full 12 seconds of the tracking data that we have. So in order to import the FBX that we downloaded from Production Crate, we're going to go to File, Import, FBX. I had mine saved to my downloads and it goes in alphabetical order. So I need to go down to the R's, I believe. Yep, right here. So we have the Render Crate Spaceship right here. And we want to hit Import and then go to the actual FBX file right here. Mine's showing 16.2 megabytes. Import. And then that imports our spaceship. You can see where it's a little bit cut off by the ground plane. So again, hotkey is you hit S on your keyboard and then you are able to scale that down and up. So we just want to get it to a decent size there. And then now if we click on it and hit G on our keyboard, we're able to move it up and down. So then we're able to place it there. And then real quick, you start in frame 1 and then you hit R on your keyboard to rotate. You're going to have to do, I believe, in the Z axis. Yep, rotate Z axis. So R and then Z will rotate this Z axis for you. So you have the spaceship coming here where the camera is, frame 1. And then what you do to keyframe is you hit I to keyframe and then come through your shot. And then you want to hit G and you can move it down. And then you want to hit R to rotate and then rotate on the Z axis. And then you can rotate it. And then you should be able to see, oh snap, I forgot to hit I. So let me go back, start over. G, move it up. Right there. Hit I. Now we have our keyframe. You can see the little diamond right here. Move to the end of the shot. I'm going to hit G and bring it down to not where it goes through the ground plane, but very close to the ground plane right there. And then you're going to hit R to rotate on the Z. Press Z on the Z axis, and you can have it rotate. And then you want to hit I on the keyboard again. And now you can see there's a keyframe here, and then that should get you your motion. So in order to make sure that this is looking good, you can click on this camera view here, and then it's going to basically show you what the actual movement looks like in the camera with your 2 key points or keyframes. So you can click on this to delete, click on this to delete, and then re-enter it to where it basically has the motion of where you want it, because right now it looks like it may be hitting the tree a little bit, so you may want to just kind of like move it over to the right just a little bit. And then the other thing when it comes to scaling 3D assets, for scale you never want to show the full image, so you see where it's like cutting it off. It makes it look bigger because it is a giant ship and you're not really able to get the entire ship into frame. So that's just a quick kind of like how you're able to move around. Again, you hit G on your keyboard and you can move the ship around, and then you hit R to rotate, and then Z to rotate on the Z axis, X to rotate on the X axis, and then Y to rotate on the Y axis. So again, hotkey R is for rotation, X, Y, or Z for each axis. G is to just move around in general. You can also do the X after G and then move basically on the X axis. Hit G and then Y to move on the Y axis, and then G and then Z to move on the Z axis. And then S is to scale, bigger or smaller. So those are the hotkeys for Blender, how you're able to move around. Position the ship where you want it, and then wherever it is, hit I, it'll add a keyframe. Fast forward to the end of the shot, hit I, and it'll add a keyframe. In Blender, on the top right, you have these different icons for different views. You can click on wire, and then you'll see your 3D object as a wire mesh, and you kind of scroll through and see what the scene looks like. And then you have different like shading on the top right. We want to come down to this little camera icon, and you can change the opacity of the background so you can see it, get less dark and more dark. Next thing we want to do is jump over to this camera icon and switch from EV to cycles, and then device GPU if you have a GPU for the GPU compute, and that'll help with your render. So up here on the top where you have these little like circle ball icons right here, you can click on and you'll see different shaders. It's okay if it disappears, it just means your computer is taking a minute for it to kind of come up. Next thing we want to do is click on film and click on transparent, so that way when we render, it's not going to render our background, it'll be a transparent render for us to use. Now we have our composite pulled up, we need to get the lighting, so we want to click on shading up here and then change this, make sure this is on world instead of object. For our lighting, we're gonna hit, I believe it's Shift A, and then search for sky texture to bring up a sky texture node. So you'll see that here. And then we want to connect the color to the color of our background. And then this is where we're gonna basically set up our lighting to match our scene the way that it looked on DaVinci, with the sun rotation, so you can see how it rotates the shadows. So you're gonna need to play around with these different settings here to match your shot. We mainly just need to get the angle of the shadows properly aligned, and we can kind of composite the blur or how dark or how strong it is, so you don't have to worry about that. Another way you can look at your real world shadows is if you go back to where you saved the PNG sequence, you can kind of match it up to the shadows in the real world shot. So you can kind of see here where I have the sun rotation is a little bit off to the side. It's not like directly on top. So I just want to double check and see and make sure that the shadow matches my scene. So I'm going to jump over to where I saved in my VFX folder and then just open up one of the PNG images, so I can just look and see what the shadows look like on the tree. It's very soft, and it looks like it's coming straight down like a 90-degree angle. The shadows aren't very dark. Don't have to worry about the darkness at this point in time. We just want to kind of get the angle, and then we can comp it in DaVinci Resolve. I'll show you that in part 3. So essentially we just need to show that the shadows are directly on top of the spaceship. So this is where you go back into Blender, into the shading port, go back over to your sky texture, and then mess around with the sun rotation to match it as best as possible to the actual shadows in the real shot, to really sell the effect that the sun is directly over and that it is casting a shadow on the ground here. So there are a few other settings that I'll show you here. Once we kind of get the sun elevation, I want that set to 90, and then the rotation set to pretty much 0 is where I want the sun to match our shot. So that way it's showing it directly over the spaceship. On the top right hand side, again, this is where you're able to change like your view on those circles there. If you do that and you make changes down here, you're not going to see anything. So you're going to have to click on this little circle icon here to actually view the changes that you're doing in real time. That way it'll render it out. So that's just a little quick tip for you guys if you're not able to see the shadow right here. You click on that little circle top right icon to actually show the actual lighting situation scenario that we're doing. Just do the best you can to match the shadow to your real scene. And then the next thing we see that the sun is too strong. So what we need to do is go to this background node and change the strength from 1 to 0.1. When we do that, we can see that it really brings the lighting down, so it looks more realistic and is not just like super overexposed. So essentially just kind of play around with the different options here for the sky texture to match the lighting of the scene as best as possible. If you change the sun size, it makes it a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler, so a little bit yellow or a little bit blue, just depending on the sun size. And you can also mess around the 3 options at the bottom as well with the air, dust, and ozone. You just want to get the lighting in here to match as close to your real scene as possible. So here's with the air, you can see what it does here when you bring it down or bring it up, makes it a little bit warmer or a little bit colder. So just mess around with these settings until you get something that looks as close as possible to your scene. It might be different, a little bit different for everybody, and let the look you're going for. Next, we need to create our shadow catcher. So you'll need to select the floor plane and then go to these object properties, this little orange box here, and then come down to the visibility. And then what you want to do is check the shadow catcher mask, so that way it'll just be a shadow catcher and it's not going to render like a white plate at the very bottom. So make sure that you click on the floor plane and then go to the object, this little gray circle here, or sorry, little orange square, and then check the shadow catcher on the right hand side. So make your final adjustments now that you have the shadow catcher in place, and then we'll go into the next steps here for you. Next, in our scene collection, we want to add a bin for the ship. So just right click, add a new bin here, drop the actual spaceship in there. And then for the ground plane, we're just going to name this one as a shadow, or as a shadow catcher. And then we're going to add it into a separate bin. And then this is going to help us when we actually go through with our render settings to actually render out the shadow separate. So we want to add a new bin, name that one shadows, create that, make sure that our actual shadow catcher is in there, and then we have our ship in one bin and then our shadows in the other bin. So the next thing we're going to want to do is actually get this set up so that we're able to export and render our ship, and we want to render it as a EXR file. And with the EXR file, we're going to basically render the spaceship and the shadows separately from each other. And with the shadow catcher selected, press M on the keyboard to create a new collection, and it's called shadows, and click OK. So now we have these 2 collections, one with our ship and one with our shadow catcher. So what we can do is we can click on this little filter drop down, and let's just enable this arrow, which is indirect only, and then kind of move your mouse away, and now you can see we have this little extra option here next to our render settings in the outline. So for our ship render layer, we basically want to not show any of the shadows, but we just want to disable this layer. We tick this little arrow, which is indirect light only, and if I tick this, you'll see the shadow disappear in the scene. But the nice thing about this indirect only light is that it's actually bounced on this floor plane and will still be rendered on the character. So you can actually see, if I disable the shadow layer completely, if I hide this collection, you can kind of see the lighting on our ship is actually changing, because that's of the bounce lighting that's bounced against the floor plane and then kind of reflecting against the ship. So this is just a nice way to tell Blender to only render the indirect light from this collection, but we don't render the actual layer or the shadow. So now we can go to this view layer section here, and this is where we choose all of the render passes that we want to render on the specific render layer. So on the ship render layer, we want to include the combine pass, which is basically all the indirect lighting and everything together. And then we also want to include is this vector pass. This one right here will give us information about motion blur. Then if you scroll down, you can also tick the ambient occlusion, and that will give us our ambient occlusion pass on our character. Okay, so once you have that set up, we can duplicate this render layer to create our second render layer. So I'm going to click on this little add view layer button right here, and we can just click on new, and now we can give it a name. So I'm going to call this one shadows, And now on this render layer, we only want to show the shadows. Alright, so now that we have both of our render layers, we have the one for ship and one for shadows. On the shadow, it's just going to render the shadow, and we have the ship with the indirect selected. And then under our ship, we just have the ship with no shadow rendered, and then we have the shadows indirect rendered there. So to test this out, we want to come over, click on render, and then click on render image. So this is just going to render one image, and then we'll see the render result of the actual render. And if we go over here to select layer, once it's done rendering, we'll be able to make sure that we have our ambient inclusion, our vector paths, our combined layer, our shadow layer. So I'll show you how to do that next. So our single render has finished. So we can check with the ship. We have our vector. This is going to give us our motion blur data. And then we have our ambient inclusion. So this is going to give us our lighting and shadows data. And we have the combined, which is kind of the finished product for our ship layer. And then our shadows layer, we're going to have essentially just the shadow catcher with the shadow on the ground here. So it renders out the shadow for us. So this is how you're able to test one frame before you render out the full scene, which usually, depending on your computer hardware, can take a long time. So if everything worked out perfectly for the render, then you would just hit render animation and make sure that you save this on your desktop on your VFX folder. Set a new folder as renders, and it's going to render one EXR file for every frame. So you're going to have 288 EXR files. Let me pull mine up and I can show you what that looks like on my screen here for render. And you see ship 1 all the way through ship 288. So save this, let it render. Again, it depends on your computer if it takes a long time or not. And then after you have this, make sure you remember where you save it. And then in the next one, I'll show you in DaVinci Resolve how to bring it into the scene, comp it, and make it look like it's actually there, and kind of finish up in part 3.